Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you guys could join us to help us wrap up our 3-week series on Grumble and Gratitude. Did you guys enjoy getting to meet our two turkeys, Grumble and Gratitude? Well, I know they enjoyed getting to meet you. At least one of them did. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been journeying with the Israelites through the wilderness as they've discovered the costs of grumbling and the blessings of gratitude. I invite you guys to open your Bibles to Numbers chapter 20. For those of you who have physical Bibles, and for those of you who have digital Bibles, go ahead and log in. We're going to take a quick stroll down memory lane. This is our 3rd week in the series of Grumble and Gratitude. So I'm going to catch you guys up to speed, and then we'll wrap it up today. On our first week, we went with the 12 spies Moses sent into the Promised Land and discovered how quickly grumbling can infect everyone. Starting with just 10 grumblers, the entire nation of over 2 million people was infected with grumbling in just a few days. And keep in mind, this was all done that fast before social media. So just process that. To the point where they were ready to murder their leaders and return back to slavery. And that week we discovered that grumbling can destroy your destiny and gratitude can anchor your future. Last week, we got hungry with the Israelites as they tried to find enough food in the wilderness to feed a nation. We discovered that gratitude trusts God to provide. We saw that grumbling can never be satisfied, no matter how much it has, because grumbling by nature isn't satisfied. Gratitude, on the other hand, enjoys peace and joy in every circumstance because it knows how to be grateful for anything. And this week, we're going to wrap up our journey with the Israelites in the wilderness at Meribah. It's just a fun thing to say. I feel like it's like the intro to a movie. I've said it all week, Meribah. It's like kind of sounds like Agrabah. That's it. Anyway, where the Israelites have run out of water for the 3rd time, and we're going to discover the effects of gratitude and grumbling on relationships. Now, since I'm sure you're all planning on celebrating Thanksgiving this week in one way or another, each of our discussion points today will be represented by an element of Thanksgiving dinner. Enjoy. And when we're done, I'll even leave you with some leftovers to take home. So let's dive in. Numbers chapter 20, verse 2. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink." We're going to start today with the meat, because that's what we care about the most, right? The meat is gratitude expectantly hopes. For all of you who take notes, that's your first one. For those of you who don't, consider it. 40 years prior, God had miraculously freed the Israelites from cruel slavery with 10 divine, miraculous plagues. They were all witness to this. 2 million plus people had been sustained by the hand of God in the wilderness for 40 years. The Israelites, though, their grumbling dismissed the blessings that existed and even called God's blessings curses. If you notice in verse 5, they called the place that God had brought them to an evil place. And they said this is, quote, no place for provision. Basically what they're saying is provision's not possible here. You brought us to a place where it's not even possible for provision to exist. It's like in the movie, have you guys seen the movie Incredibles? Incredibles is fantastic. It's like in the movie Incredibles when Dash and Violet, they stow away on the plane, and Elastigirl, she's flying the plane, and then it ends up getting hit with a missile, but she surrounds her kids and herself because she's Elastigirl and she can do that. And then they crash land in the water, and she's like, "It's okay, we're gonna stay calm and don't panic." And then she screams, and this giant piece of plane's about to crush them, and she gets them all out of the way. And then they pop up out of the water, and Dash goes, We're dead. We're dead. We're alive, but we're dead. It's just like that. Instead of showing gratitude to his mom for the 2 times that she just saved his life and expectantly hoping for what she would do next, which, spoiler, she turns herself into a boat and then, gets them out of there. She does miraculously show up, but instead of allowing what had just happened in the way that miraculous had taken place to propel them forward, he gave in to grumbling. And the thing is, grumbling, it eclipses hope and faith to see God move in miraculous ways. It gets in between, so you can't see those things anymore. When the Israelites, now they were children of Abraham, and Abraham had this heritage that he had given them with a rich relationship with God that was built on hope and trust. I remind you lovingly that Abraham was given a promise when he's 70 years old, right? A promise that was ridiculous. I don't know how many of you have seen a 70-year-old, or Sarah would have been 60, a 60-year-old give birth, but then they waited 30 more years, and I don't know how many of you have seen a 90-year-old give birth. I haven't, but I assure you, it would have been a huge stretch to believe for even a moment that one child was present or possible for Abraham at that age. Just one, and he was promised to be the father of nations. But he believed, and this is why he's the forefather of the Israelites and the forefather of us who believe in faith and hope and trust, even when it's ridiculous. This is the way it started, and this is the call to this family. The Israelites, this is the 3rd time that they needed water as a nation. The first time was at Marah. The water was bitter, and they threw this log in the water, and the water was miraculously healed. Just a quick tangent, if you'll indulge me. The word log is actually translated tree, but that doesn't make sense, throwing a tree in. So they usually, if you look in your translations, it'll say they threw a stick, or they threw a log, or they threw something like that in there. But tree is actually excellent, because they threw a tree into the water, and it made the waters living. It made them so that they could drink them. And if they were paying attention, they would have understood that a tree making waters living again would have brought them back to the garden, right? The tree of life. You threw a tree in and it was living. It would have caused them to think about the tree of life. It would have made them think about what God did in Eden, and it would have made them think, wait, if that's what happened then, what's happening now? But instead, they choose grumbling. So they just missed the whole thing that happened right there. They missed what God was trying to do. The second time, Moses struck a rock, and enough water flooded the wilderness to sate the thirst of over 2 million people and their livestock. I looked it up. How much water does a human being need? How much water does livestock need in order to survive? And even by conservative estimates, they would have needed a bare minimum of 4 Olympic swimming pools per day to provide for that nation. That's how much water. And then I want you to think about, they're in the wilderness. How much of that water gets soaked up by the ground, right? How much do you need to pour out just so that it stays, so that you could then drink it? God provided in just an absurd magnitude for them. Instead of being filled with expectant hope that comes through gratitude for the next amazing way that God would meet them in their circumstance, in their moment of need, their grumbling convinced them that it would have been better for them if they were dead. Look at the polarization between these two things. Grumbling made them forget what God did, and it made them step away from their inheritance. This call to be like Abraham, right? To walk in a rich relationship with God built on trust and expectant hope. That's what grumbling cost them. Let's move on to the next part of the plate, our next portion of dinner. Numbers 20, verse 6. Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron, your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock and for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. We're going to go to the stuffing. Gratitude fills the moment with God's presence. Gratitude fills the moment with God's presence. Moses and Aaron's solution for the crisis was to turn to the Lord and to fall on their knees in worship. They did this because they knew on an intrinsic level that the Lord inhabits the praises of his people. This would later be written in Psalm 22, but in that passage, the verb to abide, the Lord abides, so the Lord inhabits the praises of his people, is the verb yashab, which means to sit or to remain or to dwell in. This is what the Lord does in our praises. And in the midst of a crisis, God's presence is the best thing that you could ask for. I remind you, it parted waters, it stilled storms, it resurrected the dead. There's nothing more that you could ask for in a crisis or in a moment of need than God's presence to meet you in that place. Worship, though, is rooted in gratitude. And in a moment of need, gratitude is a sacrifice, isn't it? It's hard to be grateful when you're pinched. It's hard to be grateful when you're experiencing losses sting. It's hard to be grateful when things are difficult. Jesus referred, offering gratitude from that place as a sacrifice, and Jesus referred to this kind of sacrifice when he met with the woman at the well in John chapter 4. She was a Samaritan, and he was a Jew, and she knew that he was a Jew. And both the Samaritans and the Jews believed in the power of the presence of God and in worshiping God, but they disagreed about where and how to do it and what that worship should look like. See, neither the woman at the well nor the Israelites understood that worship was not about a place that you went to, it was not about animals that you killed, and it was not about songs that you sing. Real worship is in spirit and truth. And in truth, this is what Jesus would explain to her. It's when we turn to the Lord as our answer and invite his presence to inhabit the moment through our gratitude. And I understand gratitude, it's a deposit, it's a down payment. You don't get anything in return on the forefront. I'm just going to choose to be grateful and ask for your presence to come. But I remind you, when you are courageous enough to make that deposit, what happens when God's presence shows up? Your return is always greater than your deposit. Amen? Gratitude empowers us to worship in spirit and in truth, thereby inviting God's presence and everything that God's presence does into that moment. That's some good stuffing. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Numbers chapter 20, verse 9. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. We're going to start with the potatoes, and then we're going to add some gravy. Potatoes, gratitude resists the urgency of the moment. Gratitude resists the urgency of the moment. The people's grumbling made Moses feel the urgency of that moment. He did well in turning to the Lord and offering him worship and praise through gratitude. But then when he turns around out of that moment and does what God calls him to, he gives into the urgency of the moment and the urgency of the people's grumbling. It's like when you have something in the oven and the timer goes off. Do you guys use Google or Alexa or anything else like that to set timers in your house? I do it all the time. So I'll say, I'm not going to say it now because it'll actually go off, but hey, set a timer. And it sets the timer. And I have something in the oven, like cookies or dinner or something else like that. And I'm sitting down and I'm changing my child's poopy diaper, which is this close to exploding out the sides. And I've got it carefully contained on the diaper changing mat. And then the timer goes off and I realize I've got about 30 seconds to get there before it's no longer done, it's burnt. And as that's happening, I'm like, okay, what do I do? My potty training child is standing and jumping up and down on the couch going, I had an accident. And you go, what do I do? I'm at my wit's end right now. Our reflex in that moment is to scream, stop! I've had enough! And lash out at all the things that we feel like are lashing out at us. Grumbling, it salivates at every one of those factors, at the opportunity to foment anger and bitterness, resentment and frustration. But gratitude, it resists the urgency of the moment by remembering what a blessing each one of those pieces of chaos are. You know, for years before my first was born, my wife and I prayed for children. It was a very painful season for us. It was hard. And when he finally did show up, that moment was full of joy. A joy that's hard to express unless you've walked through that. And the very first time he did something, well, maybe not the very first time, but it's the one that sticks out on my mind. One time I turned around, and any of you who had little children, you understand that it just takes a moment. It doesn't matter what it is. It just takes a moment. I turned around, we were in the kitchen, and he managed to reach up and grab a jar of cinnamon that was by the coffee station, and he opened the thing and poured it on his head. And I turn around, and there's a jar on the ground, and he's sitting in the cinnamon like this, and he's just throwing cinnamon in the air and having a great time. And I'm like, in the moment, I'm like, don't you understand how hard cinnamon is to clean up? It doesn't like water. It's one thing to clean it up off the ground, but what do I do with you? And I'm just so frustrated. But even in that moment, I looked at him and I said, I remember when you weren't here. I remember when I begged God. I begged him more than I had begged him for anything in my life. I begged him for you. And I'm grateful for that mess you just made. I mean it. Have you guys gone back to the movies yet? Anybody been to the movies? I went to the movies recently, and they showed a trailer for apparently a new Matrix movie that's coming out at the end of this year. I don't know if you guys saw the first Matrix movies, but talking about the urgency of the moment reminds me of the first Matrix movie. At the end of the movie, there's a scene where Neo is the main character. He's standing in this hallway, and the bad guys are shooting at him, and all these bullets come flying at him, and he just sticks his hand out, and all the bullets stop. You remember that scene? Yeah. It was a potent scene. And he just puts his hand up, and then he grabs one bullet out of the air, and then he just examines it. He takes a look at it, and he realizes what it is. This isn't actually a bullet. There is no spoon, right? This is just code. And he just drops it on the ground. And then he looks at the rest of the bullets, and he re-examines them. He realizes what they actually are, and they just fall to the ground, leaving him completely unharmed. See, gratitude takes all of those things that grumbling would love to use to inflict damage and harm. It reminds you what it actually is and how God can actually move. What's actually our gratitude? I don't remember which one I just said. But gratitude reevaluates the circumstance and puts it back in perspective. And it defangs the moment. But grumbling turns all of God's blessings into personal injuries and wounds, and it afflicts. Let's pour some gravy on that. Gratitude overcomes anxiety and depression. Grumbling's focus on the immediacy of the here and now naturally makes it close friends with depression and anxiety. Anxiety is as blind and attractive as a naked mole rat. Have you seen one of those? You have one? There you go. What a charmer. He's disgusting. And some of you are like, no, he's so cute. You're wrong. He's gross. There's a reason why they live underground, okay? Grumbling is as blind as that naked mole rat to hope and trust. Once hope and trust are gone, depression moves in and waves this white flag, drowning you in surrender. But gratitude elevates you out of that moment. It allows you to see way back and way ahead. Looking into the past, it reminds you of God's faithfulness. And looking forward, it expectantly hopes for what God can do. In that place, anxiety and depression are replaced with unshakable joy, rooted in the Lord. and a gratitude for what he will do, even if you don't yet know how. You see how you can walk with absolute confidence and security. I don't know what God's going to do. I just know what he has done, and that's how I know for sure he's going to show up. Okay, we're almost done. Stay with me. Numbers chapter 20, verse 12. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, which means arguing, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy. We're on to the pie. I don't know what kind of pie you like, but pie is an essential for Thanksgiving. Gratitude prioritizes relationship. Moses was abused again and again by the people's grumbling, viciously. There's a quote that I heard a couple weeks ago, and I've been marinating on it ever since. It's by this guy named John Wooden. Maybe you've heard of him. A strong leader accepts blame and gives credit. A weak leader gives blame and accepts credit. Instead of allowing gratitude to shepherd his heart and rely on his relationship with the Lord to get him through this crisis, he allowed grumbling to lead him into abusing his relationship with God, and by taking credit for God's work and irreverently representing God to the people and then blaming the people. You see how that works? A strong leader takes responsibility and gives credit. If Moses had been walking in this well, he would have taken responsibility for the fact that he had led the people there. Now, he did so at the God's direction, right? At the Lord's direction. But who led them there? It was Moses. It was his responsibility that they were in that place. He should have given credit to God, reminding the people where they had been with God, and he should have taken responsibility. That would have been strong. But what he did instead in that moment of weakness was he took credit for everything that God did, and then he blamed the people, and I don't know if he blamed God, but there's a lot of blaming going on instead. Now, you might have been the victim of circumstances in your life, but if you turn around and start grumbling, you become the victimizer. The people, they were frustrated. It's okay to experience a circumstance and all the stress that goes with it. That's okay. I'm not telling you that you can't. And it's okay to go through all the groanings of working that out. But there is a difference between going through the groanings of working that out. There's a difference between being thirsty in the desert and needing water and then turning around and saying, you're bad, everything you do is evil, and I would rather be dead. You understand? It's okay to be thirsty. Working it out through relationship, that's real, authentic relationship built on trust. Gratitude anchors relationship. Grumbling betrays relationship for momentary gains. The momentary gain might be just to look good in the moment. The momentary gain might be to make yourself feel better or to supply an insecurity that you have with a temporary salve, right? But gratitude, though, it invests in relationship while in hardship. It's like buying the dip, right? You have a moment. I had investment here. It's going down. Buy into it in that moment. Lean into it. Invest more in that relationship. Don't sell, then you have real loss, right? I'm not an advisor. The leftovers. Gratitude. This is what I'm sending you home with. Gratitude is the seed of restoration. Grumbling sabotages relationship. It's infectious. It spreads to everyone around you. It infected Moses and cost him the promised land. It infected the people of Israel repeatedly and cost them many, many times. It sabotaged not just the things that it cost them, but it sabotaged their relationship with God. Grumbling, it makes loved ones bitter toward each other, and it turns friends into enemies. There's a potent cost for grumbling. It's never happy because it can never have enough, and what does come never comes the way that it wants. So it's not good enough. It'll never be good enough. Gratitude, though, hear me. Gratitude is the seed of the miraculous healing of what God wants to bring back in your life, what's been broken. Gratitude is the deposit of restoration for what you've lost. Gratitude is the usher to the manifest and felt presence of God in your life and in your circumstances. Gratitude is the answer, and grumbling is your enemy. It costs you more than you realize. We're going to step into another time of worship, and we're going to end today with communion. But my invitation for you in this moment, listen, nobody here is perfect except my wife. Nobody here has gone their entire life without grumbling. Nobody. I'm not above it, and neither are you. Here's my invitation to you, and this takes strength. I want you to take an honest look at the inside and figure out where grumbling has a foothold in you. Where has gratitude already exacted a cost from you that you're not even aware of? Where has gratitude damaged the relationships that you have with family and friends or with God? And if you're like, I don't know, think about who's coming to Thanksgiving dinner this week. Think about who's not coming to Thanksgiving dinner this week. What does it cost you? What does grumbling cost you? Well, you don't understand the circumstances. You don't know how awful they are. Listen, there are awful people everywhere. There are hard circumstances everywhere. The question is, do we really feel like grumbling is the answer? Do we feel like there is no answer and that's why we grumble? Or is there a chance that gratitude can bring life to a dead place? Well, I don't know. Is there a chance that God's presence can? Because gratitude is the beginning of your true worship that brings the presence of God. And God's presence transforms everything. Dead waters become living waters. I would love to see restoration in your life. I'd love to see relationships secured, anxiety and depression overcome. I would love to see peace in the urgency of the moment. And I have 3 little kids. I promise you, I understand the urgency of the moment. I would love to see God's transformational presence in your life. And I would love to see you walk in expectant hope. I was praying earlier this morning, and I felt like there's maybe a word for somebody here today. The difference between grumbling and gratitude, I feel like somebody's looking at something, possibly, and just experiencing it through the lens of grumbling without realizing it. But God has an invitation for you. Jesus, he was the son of a carpenter. But it's interesting, if you look at where he was brought up, there are no forests. So carpenter most likely meant mason. And there were a lot of Roman construction things happening at that place and at that time. So Jesus, who was sent to build God's kingdom, would have grown up with an understanding that he and his dad were actually building the kingdom of Rome, right? Can you imagine how difficult that dichotomy must have been for him? But think about what he understood. Rome feels like it's building itself up, but actually everything you're doing, you're going to turn it over to me. It's mine. You think you're in control. You think you have power. You think it all belongs to you, but it's actually mine. Grumbling looks at them and says, you're the worst. You think you're God. They did think that they were God, and all this kind of stuff. And it just poisons and leaves you toxic. But Jesus would have looked at it and said, no, I know who's actually in control here. I'm grateful for my Father. And then conversely, you see the disciples there at the temple, and they're like, Jesus, look, it's amazing. It's magnificent, this place, and it's where your presence is supposed to reside, all this stuff. And Jesus says, yeah, you guys are trying to elevate yourselves. That's actually going to get torn down, that thing that you have so much pride in. And instead, the way that you use this to grumble about the world around you, right? I'm so much better than that person and this person, and we're the chosen people of God and you're not. That's all going to get torn down, and actually what's going to get built up is spirit and truth, worship in spirit and in truth. Gratitude, it reevaluates everything. So the word that I felt like this morning is maybe somebody has a place, they're in a place where they feel like something's getting built or somebody's in control of something, and it's not right. It's not supposed to be that way. It's not fair. And God says, don't forget. Don't forget who I am. Don't forget what I've done. Don't forget that I'm in control. Be grateful. Not because they are executing this perfectly, but be grateful because I'm here. I'm present. I'm in the midst of that. Let's pray. Lord, reveal to us where we have allowed grumbling to gain a foothold in our heart and sabotage the work you are doing in us and in the lives of those around us. In Jesus' name.